Hey guys, I'm ComicFan13, and today I'm going to be ranking a couple Thomas & Friends headcanons from plausible to unlikely. Now, if I say that something is an unlikely headcanon, it's nothing personal. I'm just trying to state my honest opinion here. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Hey, just adding this in after the fact, I didn't get to everyone, so sorry. Ryan Dreyer 2, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, proposes the idea that Emily escaped from Scrap, went to a Sudrian museum, and was eventually bought by the Fat Controller. This would actually explain why she didn't come to the railway any time between the 1800s and when she joined the railway, because, well, Emily's been around since the 1890s. So, yeah, it's kind of weird that she wouldn't be on the railway before that. So, yeah, I kind of like this headcanon. Although, I do have to say, making her number 12 because she was the 12th built, a little on the nose there, but I'll give it a pass. I give this the rating of plausible. Okay. Robo Bird proposed a couple headcanons, so let's make each of these brief. Now, the first one is one I saw a couple times, suggesting the idea that Thomas is not an E2, but instead a modified Furness Railway number 101, which, officially speaking, I have to qualify that as unlikely purely because it's been confirmed several times that Thomas is an E2. Not to mention, Thomas arrived on Sodor in LBSC livery in The Adventure Begins, which I don't believe that the CGI series, model series, and railway series are the same canon, but that's further proof that he isn't from the Furness Railway. Although I guess you could say that Thomas was just sold to the LBSC before he came to Sodor. I don't know. But I do have to admit, it isn't that hard to see the E2 elements in the Furness number 101. Just extend the side tanks and it honestly looks like Thomas. So, although it works as an AU, as a headcanon I have to mark it as unlikely. The next headcanon that he proposed was that Albert, a Furness Railway tank engine, is responsible for Virginia, a coach, coming to Sodor. Now, I don't know enough about their backstory to say if that's true or false, so I'll say it's plausible. I mean, let's be real, crazier things have happened. The next headcanon proposes the idea that the XNER Bobo electric engines, God that's a mouthful, were scrapped and replaced with BR Class 86s. Now, I have to mark this as unlikely for one reason, and one reason alone. This is the Fat Controller's railway. When does he ever actually scrap engines? I think it's more likely that they would be relocated to somewhere else, so I have to mark this as unlikely. Next, he proposes the idea that the BR Ginty engines Percy talks to and Percy takes a plunge are the Normanby branch fleet, and the pug that arrives in the Fat Controller's engines would become the station pilot. Sure, why not? Plausible. And finally, he proposed the idea that the Fat Controller, the first one, is an ancient entity from beyond time and space. Screw it, it's canon. Thomas Percy James proposes the idea that the Fat Controller never owned Diesel, but he was just sent Diesel because no one else wanted him, pretty much. And the controller of the other railway pays him to keep an eye on him. And not a bad headcanon, but the fact is, if we're looking at the model series, he's sent back to the other railway at the end of most episodes he appears in, up until Fergus breaks the rules, which at that point he does become part of the railway, even though he's still punished. If we're looking at the railway series, he returned like once or twice and never joined the railway, but that was the end of him appearing. and the CGI series completely rewrote his history to make it so that he became part of the railway after his incident in Pop Goes the Diesel. So, a decent AU, but doesn't really work out. Unlikely. Train Dude 57, the B1, proposes the idea that Billy died in a horrific accident, and Charlie was built from his remains. Now, don't get me wrong, that is an awesome headcanon, but just because of the fact that the Fat Controller doesn't seem like the kind of guy to do that, I have to say it's unlikely. But if this was on the mid-Sodor, that would definitely happen. Thomas and E.G. Couples and Ships, interesting title, says that All Engines Go is a nightmare that Toby once had. Sure, plausible. This is why you don't take the special coal before you go to sleep. Steam Engine sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, proposes the idea that after Edward's exploit, Edward is rebuilt with a raised footplate. Now, I can tell that you probably got the idea from the Unlucky Tug, didn't you? Honestly, I love that design for Edward. And honestly, it would make logistical sense that they would probably want to raise that area so that his side rods don't mess up his side again. But since it never happened, I have to mark it as unlikely, even though that would be cool if it happened. Thomas Fan 34 proposes the idea that Billy and Charlie used to work on the same railway, and Billy always feels bossed around because he had to do all of Charlie's work since he was slacking off. You know what? I like that headcanon. Plausible. The Railway Series fan proposes the idea that Gordon stopped complaining about pulling goods trains while James didn't stop complaining, which is canon. Thinks of the idea that the Fat Controller is an incredible engineer and mechanic, which is canon, and proposes the idea that Rebecca came to the railway when Pip, Emma, and Gordon were out of service and now does flying kipper work. Sure, why not? Plausible. Chill Dude proposes the idea that the Old Iron Bridge is a part of a separate railway nearby the Peel Godred. It ran many poorly maintained, nameless engines, which is why one of them supposedly fell off of it. Sure, why not? Plausible. J-Man Productions proposes the idea that Puffa and the Marklin engine are the same character. Puffa is sent to Sodor after his company goes bankrupt, and then it comes to Sodor and works on the railway sometime around 1924. Yeah, that actually makes sense. I'm on the fence about if Tugs and Thomas share a universe. I like to think that, but I don't consider it canon for both legal reasons, and I just love both of them on their own. I don't want to see Tugs as just a spin-off of Thomas. I want to see it as its own thing, but I also like the idea of them sharing a universe, so sure, plausible. Harry Kamenman, sorry for mispronouncing that, proposed a lot of headcanons, so let's do it in abridged mode. Edward covering for the Fat Controller, sure, plausible. Molly and Neville run the Great Waterton line instead of Stanley. There's no evidence for this apart from Stanley no longer being on the line, so I'm going to have to say unlikely. Henry, James, and Percy being from the same workshop, although I don't see any reason why it couldn't be the case, they're all based on very, very different engines, even if they are one of a kind, so I have to say unlikely. Porter is Puffa and he saved Big Mickey. I find that very unlikely for two different reasons. First off, Puffa and Porter look nothing alike, and from my knowledge, Big Mickey sacrificed himself, so I have to say unlikely. Bear and Boko feel overshadowed by his steam engines. This actually makes sense considering that the Fat Controller prefers steam engines and that he refers to steam engines as real engines, so naturally Bear and Boko would probably feel a bit unappreciated. Engines have to give their permission to work on a railway. I find that unlikely because the choice is you either work or you get scrapped. At least that's how BR probably would handle it. Although I do suppose that the Fat Controller technically gives his engines a choice, but as he puts it, lazy engines get sent away. So although you technically have a choice, not really. In the CGI era, the engines voice themselves. Wait, what? I'm assuming you mean in the context of the show and not in real life. But either way, unlikely, because the voices change a lot. Plus, I severely doubt that Hit Entertainment or Mattel Creations created sound booths for the engines. Thomas and Percy have been known to travel from the UK to go to Day Out with Thomas events. This is likely canon, considering that Sir Handel has a similar thing with his real-life appearances. However, I personally like to think that each of the Day Out with Thomases have their own minds, and perhaps go through a bit of an identity crisis on if they're really Thomas, if they're just a replica. And maybe the Thomases that don't actually function and are just pushed around, maybe they act almost like troublesome trucks. But anyway, canonically speaking, I say that's likely. Many famous people have come to Sodor? Yeah, probably. And finally, in 2014, several engines from around the world came to visit the NWR to celebrate 100 years of the railway. I find this unlikely since not only is there the issue of loading gauge, but that would make the Great Race seem a lot less remarkable in the fact that there's engines from all around the world. And I'm done. There are several other headcanons people have proposed, but this has taken me almost an hour to record, so have a good day. I'm taking a nap.